Chapter 24. Wilkes watched the alien rip Beulah apart. He yelled into the comm, "Blake, get down!" He slapped the fire controls for the robot guns trained on the mouth of the alien hive. He saw the edges of the entrance light with tiny flashes as the 20mm expended uranium slugs chattered against the walls inside. Having a specific target, the robot gun hosed it in bursts of 20 S-shaped patterns from top to bottom, stopping a meter or so short of the ground. The gunfire chopped the alien into pieces, blowing the shattered parts back against the hive like a swat from a giant steel broom. The fire computer locked in the shape of the alien and shut the gun down, waiting for more targets that looked like him. Billy screamed. She was looking at the viewer, and it was dialed up so she couldn't miss what Beulah was. The ancillary nodes of his digestive system hung from his torso. White polymer circulating fluid oozed over everything. Where a human would be soaked with blood and painted bright crimson, Beulah was drenched in milky froth. Tubules, shunts, circulatory lines, all sprayed from the ruined android body. Billy screamed again, a wordless cry. Wilkes knew then that she'd never suspected. "Billy!" She kept yelling. He didn't have time for this. Over her din, he yelled into the comm, "Blake, move it! Stay low! You're clear to 1 meter only!" The computer triggered the robot gun again. Wilkes only saw the aliens for a second before the things were punched back into the mound. Blake moved, but the wrong way. She crawled back to where Beulah lay, staying under the gun's field of fire. "Blake, goddammit!" Billy screamed again. Wilkes slid the control chair over a meter, reached out, slapped Billy's face. Her scream stopped, as if cut off by a laser harvester. "He's alive!" Blake said over the comm. She hoisted the terribly wounded android onto her back and crawled back to where the crewman lay. "Oh God! Oh God! Oh God!" Billy said. Wilkes lost it. "I tried to fucking warn you. I tried to keep you away from him. You wouldn't listen to me. Yes, he's an android. The whole platoon, all of them, they're all androids. Created for a mission like this. How do you think they managed to breathe that thin air and keep going?" Billy stared at the screen, not blinking, not moving. Blake zigzagged, cleared the APC's gun line, and stood, Beulah still on her back. Half of Beulah. The crewman was right behind her. "That's why they had to go back into the mound," Wilkes said, feeling very tired all of a sudden. "They couldn't let the humans die. It's the first law." Billy stared straight ahead. "They're faster, stronger, cheaper than we are to maintain. Some people don't like working with them, so the new experimental models were made to pass for human. They eat, drink, piss, act, and even feel like humans. They can hate, fear, love, just like we do. From the outside, even an expert can't tell. Everything external just looks the same. But I guess you know that, don't you?" Finally, she turned to look at him. He could see her pain. It went all the way to her core. She had fallen in love with an android, had slept with him. For some people, that would be the same as falling in love with a dog or a farm animal and having sex with it. "The pirates didn't know," he continued. "That's why the aliens weren't in any hurry to attack the Marines and use them for incubators. Their flesh wouldn't support the babies. They look the same, feel the same to the touch, but apparently they don't taste very good. I'm sorry, kid." When she spoke, her voice was as cold as deep space. "Why didn't you tell me, Wilkes?" "I tried. You didn't want to hear it. You never said anything about androids. By the time I realized I should, it was too late. What was I supposed to say? You're in love with an artificial person? He was born in a vat and put together like a puzzle by a bunch of androtechs. You wouldn't have believed it. You should have told me. Yeah, well, life is full of things I should have done and didn't. This mission is screwed, and we're leaving. The rest of it we sort out later." Billy turned back to the screen. Blake and the crewman had what was left of Beulah cradled between them and were approaching the APC at a quick jog. Behind them, the mouth of the alien's nest erupted with dozens of the things. The robot gun worked its deadly magic, hammering the creatures with chunks of armor-piercing death, battering them to pieces. Still, they boiled forth like angry fire ants, ran into the wall of metal, and shattered against it. Dozens, scores, hundreds of them. They kept coming. The robot gun was state-of-the-art. It locked onto the acquired targets, calculated for local gravity, windage, movement, then fired efficiently and dispatched them. But no matter how efficient a weapon, it could only live as long as it was fed. The last of the ammunition ran through the electronic machinery. The control panel lit with a flashing red light. The gun, said the computer, was empty. Since further identified by image targets were in evidence, the computer hereby advised the primary operator that reloading was now required for continued operation. Since the spare ammunition module had already been expended, the primary operator was hereby notified that additional modules would have to be manually inserted for continued operation. Meanwhile, the system would remain on standby, identifying and tracking IBI targets. Wilkes shook his head. Bad news. The APC had shot up all the ammunition it carried. Nobody had figured a lot of air-to-air combat would be happening on this mission, and the aliens kept bounding out of that damned nest like giant black termites, stoked on steroids and amphetamines. Must be 50 of them heading towards the ship, despite all the ones the gun had blown away. More of the things climbed over the piled bodies as he watched. Time to leave. Blake and the crewman and Beulah were only 50 meters away from the ship. Wilkes ordered the outer hatch open. "Triple time, Marine," he said to Blake. "There's a shitload of company behind you coming up fast, and I want you to shut the door real soon now." They were close enough so Wilkes could see their expressions now. The crewman turned and looked over his shoulder, and apparently didn't like what he saw. He was the limiting factor. Blake could run probably twice his best, even carrying Beulah. The crewman speeded up, and Blake matched him. For no reason he could think of, Wilkes was reminded of an old joke, one that he'd heard as a kid, about sheep herders. "Come on, guys, what say? Let's get the flock out of here." Billy was numb, all the way to her soul. Wilkes had slapped her, but she couldn't feel anything but a little heat where his palm had struck. Lies. It was all lies, everything. How could Mitch have done it? Why hadn't he told her the truth? Bootsteps clattered up the entry ramp. They were here. Blake entered the cabin. She squatted and carefully eased Mitch onto the deck. There was an aid kit on the wall, but Blake passed it and pulled a plastic box from a cabinet instead. Of course, a human aid kit wouldn't help. The crewman said, "Go, man! Get us the hell out of here!" Wilkes was in the pilot's seat. "Strap in," he ordered. Only the crewman hustled to obey. Billy stood over Mitch. His eyes were closed. He ended at the waist, and what spilled from his torso was ugly to look upon. "Sit down, Billy!" She still didn't move. Mitch opened his eyes. For a moment, they were unfocused, but then she saw him, recognize her. I'm sorry, Billy," he said. His voice bubbled, as if he were talking underwater. I was going to tell you." He gasped, trying to get more air to work his voice. Blake had the box open. She pulled several small electronic devices out and slapped them against Mitch's shoulder and chest. Another one on his neck, yet another to his temple. She ran a tube from a plastic bag of clear fluid into the device on his neck. The liquid began to flow through the tubing. Blake pulled a plastic can out and sprayed a bluish foam all over the torn waist. The foam crackled and bubbled and quickly settled into a thick film that changed from blue to bright green, coating all the exposed nodules and tubing. "Is he going to die?" Billy asked. "I don't know," Blake said. "His system valves have shut down all the torn circulators and the self-repair programs are running. It's a lot of damage, but we're designed to withstand a lot." "Sit the fuck down!" Wilkes roared. "We've got to lift now!" Billy moved to a seat, still watching Blake work on Mitch. Blake hooked one hand under a stanchion, the other she put against Mitch's chest. "I'm anchored," she said, "and I've got him held stable. Go!" Wilkes cycled the hatch closed and initiated the lift program. The ship's propellers cycled up, whining as they came online. "Sequencing for liftoff," he said. "Stand by." Something slammed into the APC, hard enough to jolt the vessel, to make it ring with the impact. "Shit!" the crewman said. More impacts. 3, 5, 10 of them. "They're all over us!" the crewman yelled. "Fuck 'em," Wilkes said. "We're gone." He punched a control. Nothing happened. "What the hell?" the crewman began. "One of them is blocking a thrust skirt tube," Wilkes said. "The computer won't fire it. I'll have to go manual." There came a screech as metal tore. "They're digging through the hull," Billy said. "That's impossible," the crewman said. Another grinch of metal being clawed by something harder than it was. Wilkes tapped controls. The APC shook, but lifted, wobbled a little, but rose slowly, went up a couple of 100 meters. Billy could see through the forward screens. "All right," the crewman yelled. "We're too heavy," Wilkes said. "We'll have to shake the fuckers off." The ship lurched, dropped, twisting to port as though a heavy weight had landed on that side. A siren began screaming from the control panel. Wilkes worked frantically, hands dancing rapidly back and forth. The APC began to level, but it continued to settle. "That's the left propeller," Wilkes said. "Emergency brake lock. Something is inside the housing. I can't override." But the housing is armoured," the crewman said. "The intake is protected by a finger-thick wire mesh," Wilkes said. "But something went through it. The computer knows the danger. The carbon-boron blades are super-cooled. They're brittle. They hit something bigger than a few grams, they'll shatter and blow us to pieces. I can't compensate enough with the other repellers to get us into orbit. We have to land and clear the housing." "You mean go outside?" Wilkes stared at the crewman. "Unless you've got a better idea." "Oh, man." Thumping continued on the hull. More squeals as the metal bent or gave up the fight. Billy stared at Mitch. He looked at her, his eyes clear. She didn't know what to say. She'd lain naked with this man. No, not a man. An android. Had shared her body with him. Had told him her secrets. Had given him her truth, for whatever it was worth. And he had responded as a man. But he had also kept from her the biggest truth of all. As she watched him lay there, possibly dying, she felt outraged, felt sick, felt that if she never saw him again it would be too soon. And yet another feeling stirred deep inside her mind, at the threshold of her perceptions. It was a feeling she could not deny, despite what he had done. She didn't want to look at the thing looming there, didn't want to know about it, didn't want to acknowledge it. She tried to close the door between her and that stirring, to make it go away. But looking at him, she couldn't. Well, it didn't matter. They were all going to die here. It wouldn't be long before the aliens clawed their way in. Billy looked at the weapons Blake still carried. Wilkes wouldn't let the things take them alive. It would be quick, if it came to that. So it didn't matter what she was feeling about Mitch. No, nothing mattered. Her short and mostly unhappy time was about to come to its end. Except for the few hours when she thought Mitch was other than he turned out to be. It hadn't been much of a life. Maybe she should tell him that, since they were going to die. Or maybe not. What difference did it make? The APC reached the ground, settled unevenly. "Maybe we crushed a couple of them underneath," Wilkes said. Billy stared at him. That didn't matter either. They were all going to die. The way she felt at the moment, it would be a relief.